Welcome back, everyone. We are now turning in our Bible to the prophet Amos, right? Hosea, Joel, and now Amos. And Amos is one of my favorite minor prophets, and Amos tells us when he is operating. In Amos chapter 1 and verse 1, it says this. Turn there with me. Amos chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the word of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa. Now, Tekoa, if you are in Jerusalem, is about 14 miles south. It's mentioned 2 times in the scriptures. It's mentioned here in Amos, and it says that Amos is from Tekoa, and then the other time is in the story of David, right? When David's third son, remember this, Absalom, he kills his brother Amnon, and then Absalom goes on the run. And remember, David loves Absalom, right? David could see Absalom becoming king one day, but not anymore, not after this. And so Absalom, he goes on the run, remember, and he goes up to Galilee. Well, Joab, David's general, can see the pain that this is causing David. And so Joab, what does he do? He goes out and he recruits a wise woman from Tekoa to come to court and present this case about this family where one brother has killed the other brother, and rightfully so. And the whole family has taken sides on one side of it or the other. And the way the case is presented, the brother who killed the other brother should be brought back into the family, right? And it's a clear-cut case, and the case is put forth by the wise woman of Tekoa. And David, right, being a wise man himself, said, hey, didn't General Joab, didn't he put you up to this? Right? And remember, it is her testimony that causes David to bring Absalom back. And so we have the wise woman of Tekoa, and here we have Amos. And Tekoa is way out from Jerusalem. It's a good 10 to 15 miles south of Jerusalem. And it is farming country, right? That is where they raise the herds and the flocks, and that's where they grow the fig trees. And so verse 1 says, the words of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, the vision he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was king of Judah and Jeroboam, son of Joash, was king of Israel, right? That's Jeroboam 2. He said, verse 2, the Lord roars from Zion and thunders from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds dry up, and the top of Carmel withers. And so this will time God's voice, it thunders from Jerusalem, and we hear it all the way down to Tekoa. And even today in Tekoa, right, when the Muslim noonday prayers roar out from Jerusalem, they roll down the hills and through the valley, and you can hear them 15 miles away in Tekoa. And so this is a pretty amazing thing that happens. Well, Amos, right, he's given the job to go to the northern kingdom. Now, he is from Judah, right, south of Jerusalem. But his job as a prophet is to go north to Israel, to Bethel, right, and prophesy against the northern kingdom. Right, and when he is writing, right, in verse 1, he says, the words of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, the vision he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was king of Judah and Jeroboam, son of Joash, was king of Israel. And so then think about this. What are our dates? Well, Uzziah is king from 767 to 740, and Jeroboam is 2 up north. He's king, I believe, from 782 to 733. The dates are kind of different, mixed up there, but somewhere around there. And so when are those 2 kings simultaneously kings? Somewhere between 753 and 740. Now, if we turn over to Zechariah quickly, towards the end of the minor prophets, in chapter 14 of Zechariah, in verse 1, it says this. It says, a day of the Lord is coming. Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. Right here, we're speaking again about this great and dreadful day in Revelation, right, that we introduced back in Joel, in the book before in Joel, right? Zechariah is writing at 520 BC. Now, verse 2 says, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. right? Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Verse 3, then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations, and he will fight on a day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west. Right? We saw in the prophet Ezekiel that this event, right, when the Lord comes to Jerusalem and puts his feet on the Mount of Olives in the end times events, right, that the Mount of Olives will be split in half and a great crevasse will open and water will flow out from the temple down to the Dead Sea, making the Dead Sea fresh water. Right? And this is an allusion to the very same thing. And so in verse 4 it says, on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half of the mountain moving south. And you will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Right, there it is again. All right, the reference to the earthquake mentioned in Amos. It's also mentioned in Zechariah. And so Amos is a prophet in Israel for 2 years before this earthquake when Uzziah was king. And we have two separate references of that earthquake in the Bible, right? In Amos and in Zechariah. And so it puts Amos in that period from 753 to 740 when he is operating as a prophet. And during that time, apparently, the big one hit, the big earthquake hit. And so Amos, what does he do? He heads up north and he prophesies against the northern kingdom at Bethel. And we all remember Bethel, right? It is the southernmost town of the northern kingdom of Israel, right? Dan is the northernmost town. And so Dan and Bethel are the northern and southernmost borders of Israel. And remember, Jeroboam 1, what did he do? He built altars to the golden calf at Dan and Bethel. And so there is this place of worship at Bethel. And this place of worship is to the golden calf. And so it's Amos's job assignment to travel north to Bethel and to preach against the sinful worship there and to lay the smackdown. And so that is exactly what Amos does. Amos travels to Bethel and he begins his work as a prophet there. And of course, he encounters a great deal of opposition, right? It is one thing to prophesy, as Jeremiah did, against your own people, but it is another thing altogether to go into enemy territory and prophesy against them up there. And if we turn over to chapter 7 of Amos and we look in verse 10, turn there with me, Amos chapter 7, verse 10, it says this in verse 10. It says, then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, that is the priest at the altar of the golden calf, he sent a message to Jeroboam 2, king of Israel. And it said this, it says, Amos is raising a conspiracy against you in the very heart of Israel. He's speaking badly about your temple. He's speaking badly about your golden calf. And the land cannot bear all his words. For this is what Amos is saying about you, King Jeroboam. He says, Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will surely go into exile, away from their native land. That is what Amos is saying to everyone. In verse 12, it says, then Amaziah said to Amos, get out of here, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah. Earn your bread there and do your prophesying there. Don't prophesy anymore at Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary, This is sacred ground. This is sacred ground, and a king has made it sacred, so you can't speak out against it. So get out of here. Go back to your own place, Get out of the king's sanctuary and get out of the temple of the kingdom. Verse 14, and Amos answered Amaziah. Now Amos doesn't come from a long line of prophets, He's not a priest like we met in Ezra, where he has this long genealogy. No, he's not that. And Amos says this. He says, I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, I don't have this long lineage. I don't have this great pedigree, but I was a shepherd, he says, and I also took care of sycamore fig trees, He says, I was a farmer. But verse 15, the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. Amos, right, he's like the country preacher who comes into town. Right? He doesn't have the PhD. He doesn't have all the credentials. Right? He's just a good old country preacher. But he says this in verse 16. He says, now then, hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel and stop preaching against the descendants of Isaac. Right? You say that, he says. Well, I'll tell you what the Lord says. And in verse 17, he says, therefore, this is what the Lord says. Your wife will become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and your daughters will fall by the sword, and your land will be measured and divided up, and you yourself will die in a pagan country. And this northern kingdom of Israel, it will surely go into exile away from their native land. Right? And with that, Amos leaves. Right? And we certainly see that happen in 722 BC when Israel's conquered. Right? But Amos, he's just a simple country preacher. And he came to town, right? He came from the south, goes up north to his enemy, and he prophesies against the northern kingdom. He condemns him and rolls out. And that is the prophet Amos.